everybody. I'm going to stand over here so you can see the slides properly. I'm somewhere between slightly nervous and a little bit giddy on the fact that this is the first time I've been around real people in real life since March the 13th last year. So forgive me a little bit. I'm going to take you through why diversity in tech matters. Now, I'm sure to some extent there's a slight amount of eyeball rolling. I myself have had people going, why are we still talking about women in tech or whatever else it might be? Surely we're there already. Well, we're definitely better than we were, but we're not there just yet. If we look at sort of diversity generally, obviously we're coming off a backdrop of social unrest, Black Lives Matter. The diversity conversation has definitely reignited across many industries. You know, companies, people, products, they're all coming back under the spotlight. And no company is untouched by that. So in a field where it's predominantly white, male developers, we've got a long way to go. So I want to talk to you about why diversity matters, what we can do to change around where we're failing, and give you some encouraging examples, because it's not all doom and gloom. Okay, so diversity, what is it good for? And I hope you all hum the rest of that line. Fundamentally, financial services, technology, they undermine every aspect of our lives, how we communicate, how we play, how we consume, and it's far too big a topic for one demographic to have to look after all by themselves. You know, if you're going to have that much influence, not only is it a nice to have, it's really essential that we're all playing a part in that. The mistakes that I think you're probably all very much aware of, things like IBM and Apple, when they first did their cameras, couldn't recognize black faces the same way as we've seen with facial recognition software. The Dyson hand dryer couldn't recognize black hands in the first instance. So all those sort of algorithms that are written, people creating them, people participating in the build out of them, if we don't have diversity built in at the beginning, then it's going to create a problem when they come to deliver the product. And it's always better when it's done at the beginning rather than an afterthought and bolted on afterwards. And I know, by the way, from the talk you had just now, that some of the pieces I'm going to touch on, you've already had an introduction to a large extent. So I'm not going to quote numbers at you. I'm going to try and stick with stories rather. It may surprise some people, but even back, or well, as recently as 2011, on voice recognition, women's voices weren't recognized either because the tech had all been built by men. So again, as much as that's sort of a gender focus, I don't want to spend too much time lingering on gender. Hopefully everyone's had a read, because I'm going to assume you don't need me to read that out loud. And does it matter when we're in a crisis, when we've just gone through coronavirus? Again, the ladies who were on just now spoke to the fact that there is an equality of responsibility around childcare, around support generally. It's a social function, it's a cultural function, it's not a man-woman thing. But it has definitely impacted a number of women more significantly and minorities more significantly than it has men. And fundamentally, if we want to create new ways of working and we want to have new innovations, we need to have a mix of voices in that conversation. If we look at tech specifically, there was a recent survey done by Tech Monitor, so this year in 2021, and the largest issue that was called out by the technology leaders, by the CIOs, was the ability to improve diversity and inclusion within their function. So we know it's still up there. We know it's getting slightly worse post-COVID. And we also know that, you know, along the list of things that they need to worry about, you know, somehow project delivery is significantly lower down than diversity. We have some people who've reflected that it's, you know, is a nice to have, that you've got more important things to be doing in a post-COVID era, looking at your future roadmap, looking at your strategies, trying to get your balance sheet back up. And there are other people that feel it's too important to ignore. And if we're not making sure that we are actively engaged in the conversation right now, we're sure as hell not going to be well placed for it when everyone feels that they are then back on their feet. I do have notes, I'm sorry. Am I the only one that's had notes today? Possibly. Okay. So, I think we can all agree, whether you're male, female, disabled, fully abled, or any other minority, tokenism is not fun for anybody on either side of the equation. However, most companies, when they come to deal with DE&I, the equality is very important, they have a pretty stock-in-trade way of dealing with it. They'll do an education program, tick. They'll get a resource group going that says, these are all the bits of information you need to know about why it's important. They'll get a manager and a senior lead in place, and they'll probably do an annual report commentary. Tick, gold star, we're all done, fantastic. But actually, I can't decide if it needs a click or not. But actually, that's awful. It's awful for everybody involved. It's not a box-ticking exercise, and surface level processes like this, surface level engagement like this, does more harm than good. The people who are in the roles as a diverse function feel that they were only put there for their diversity. The people who weren't there or were there beforehand feel that maybe there was a better talent that could have got it. It's up there with positive discrimination. It's not healthy and it's not useful for anybody at all. And if anything, it's much more harmful, both for the person's confidence who's being asked to do a role as a minority, and also it slows the pace of real change because it has this facade that something is happening, but actually it's not. And if we look at it, I know, again, previously they were talking about gender. It's not just gender. And even from the initial metrics that people have around DE&I, generally these are the things that they talk to quite a lot: age, mental ability, gender identity, ethnicity, et cetera, they're the easy ones to get to. But there's definitely, it's not just one person, and it's definitely not just one layer around that diversity piece. If we take it a little bit further, there's religion, there's education, there's where you grew up. I think there was a question about geography earlier. There are what your parents are like, how you have experienced your life to date. You go a bit further again. How long have you been with the company? Where are you in your career? Where are you in your professional status? Your tenure, how big is your network? All of these things will lead to the diversity of the conversations that you're having within your staff. And then culturally, there are lots of different things where people from different cultures are taught to engage with seniority in different ways. It's not always the loudest voice, and it's not always the person with the biggest jazz hands that is actually the person that should be being promoted. So again, it behoves us all to kind of look out a little bit. If people have been shown to be deferential to seniority, if they have been taught to not shout about their personal sort of wins, then we need to make sure that there is somebody there who can do it for them and position them in a way that makes them comfortable but ensures that they are well placed for promotions or the next role when they need to do it. So again, not just one employee, not just women, not just a particular minority. One of the biggest issues, and I think the previous ladies mentioned this as well, it's called onliness, and it leads to loneliness. And it will also lead to something else I'm going to talk to in a minute. But if you look around and you are perpetually the only person who looks like you, who thinks like you, who engages like you, and you are surrounded by a room full of sameness, that's incredibly isolating, and it can make you double check and double guess yourself at every stage, because if everyone is running at the cliff and somebody else is running away from the cliff, the one person who looks like an idiot is the one moving away from the cliff. So again, we just have to recognize that if you are the only person in the room that has a particular view or perspective and you don't feel like you're being listened to, it will encourage you to get quieter and quieter as you go through. But also, it's incredibly lonely, and it certainly won't encourage more people to actively choose that as a space to be in. So where are we failing? Our role models. If we think about it, while there has been a bit more about the different types of people who sit in technology, and there have been some really great movies about black ladies influencing the Apollo 13, et cetera, and really raising the bar on that one. If we look at role models, we have, hopefully, they're all very white. We have Bill Gates, we have Paul Allen, who are both IBM. We have, being very slow, we have Elon Musk. We then also have Apple, Steve Jobs, and we have then finally Mr. Zuckerberg. They are white, they are male. they may or may not be privileged. Mr. Zuckerberg is doing a disappearing act. There we go. He wishes he was in front of the US government. So, yeah, sorry. We need to change the false narrative because there are loads of people in tech now. I look at the audience that we have here, and you're about 50-50 on a gender split. I don't know what your backgrounds are. I don't know what your education is. I don't know where you are in your businesses. I sit here and people will make assumptions and judgments about me. Even I stand here, I'm just very short. However, I am an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 2. I got my British passport when I was 29. I am an Aussie. You can hate me for it. It's okay. I broke my back when I was 21, but I'm vertical. Again, we spoke about disabilities. 80% of disabilities are invisible. I'm not very good at standing up or sitting down for extended periods of time. But whether I'm given a comfy chair or expected to perch on a tall pedestal, people don't think about that because when they look at me, they can't see anything going on. And then equally, there's a pay gap, and people have talked about this endlessly, but all I ever hear is, we are 100 years from parity on the gender pay gap. Whoopie-doo, I think we're about 100 years off the pay gap being closed about 10 years ago. So really, we need to start measuring that. We need to start shouting it out. We need to be aware of it. And, I'm not saying that one person needs to be paid more than the other, but if you think of the fact, if I give you a few stats, there was a review done by the government, and 50% of men said they would be perfectly happy to work in companies where there was no gender parity. Now, that assumes that they're happy to either be on the lower or the higher salary. Sod's Law says that they'll be on the higher salary, but they're perfectly okay with that, whereas only 1% of women are. So again, we're going to be having issues with how we do our recruitment processes. So imposter syndrome, if we come back to that onlyness, the loneliness, if you are the only person in the room, you will question your judgment, you will question your ability to have an opinion. And generally, everyone's got it. I've got it in spades, that 2 o'clock in the morning voice that tells you that you're talking bullshit. We all have it, and yet we all think everybody else is got their shit together and they're all good, and it's just us that are the ones quietly freaking out. But that's absolutely not true, and I think the more that we can talk about that, the more we will be able to encourage people to feel that they are not so lonely. So what can we change? There's lots of good news. Change is happening. We can be the voice of change for our companies, for ourselves. We can believe the victim if somebody comes to you and says, I think these things are happening and this is how I feel about it. We can call out bad behaviors. We can make sure that we have data and pay transparency. We can look at our hiring practices, and even using an algorithm, even if you take off gender, you take off age, which we do anyway by default, I think, these days, you will still know if someone's called Betty as opposed to Jessica, you're going to know that Betty's probably older than Jessica. And where they live and what sort of education they have will also tell you a lot about that individual. So although it's supposedly blind and you're hiring the right talent for the right job, you're not necessarily. The other things that we can do are around where we have talent going for roles, or where we sit in management. We can make sure that if we have a man and a woman who are both on the final two, and we hire the man because he is the best fit for the job, and it should always be the best fit for the job. I can't abide anything else. If the woman is not the best fit for the job, can we make sure that she's given support and training, and we look at what the gap was, so the next time she goes for a promotion, maybe she will be the best fit for the job, and we can have more role models. Maybe it's a minority figure instead, so I probably shouldn't say she, but the principle remains. If you have a minority or a diverse candidate that does not make the grade in the final two, find out what those gaps are and help them fill them so they can be the ultimate good choice. Now, one of the things that we have to get quite comfortable with is it's going to be uncomfortable. If you hire for diversity, you will have different voices in the room. You will have someone being the voice of dissent. You will have someone being the person who doesn't speak or use language in the same way that you do. And there will be communication issues. There will be hostility and trust, possibly from the team that already existed, because now you've put this weird person in the middle of them. There may also be implementation hurdles just in terms of that language and cultural piece, and also changing how you do things, the governance of the structure in your business. And God forbid, there will also be incorrect talent retention, because some really good talent will walk out the door. And you may end up holding on to bad talent because they hit your diversity stats. You don't want that either. So again, it will be difficult. And I think Dilbert's got it just right there. So I hope that I have left you with some thoughts about why diversity is important in tech, what we can do more, and then also looking at how we challenge the status quo. So I invite you to rebel against the usual, and I invite you to both individually and collectively with your staff allow diversity to flourish in your companies and in your outcomes and your delivery. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kate. That was brilliant.
Okay.
Even with the notes. The notes were brilliant. Okay, we've had lots of questions come through.
Great.
So I'm just going to cherry pick a few of these. So how would the hiring process work in a modern workplace when trying to become more inclusive? Would this start with a diverse leadership team?
I think if your CEO and your leadership team are not on board with the diversity requirement and the diversity intent, then nothing's going to change, and it's going to be incredibly difficult. So yes, absolutely, we have to be looking at things like the language that we use, and Microsoft has got some really good tech, where you've got your spell check. There's also a checker that can check on the inclusiveness of the language that you have used, whether it's in a job advert or within a piece of text that you're sending out. So it's on a number of lenses, but yes, if senior management are not on board, it's not going to happen.
Okay, and you did touch on this in the presentation, but the question is, surely hiring should be based purely on competence. To base it on categories like gender and race would lead to discrimination, would it not?
Absolutely, there's positive discrimination, there's negative discrimination. However, human beings make decisions on bias. They do not make it on logic, they do not make it on data. They make decisions on bias, and even when you have women on panels for investment committees into tech, the women are biased against the women, even though the women they know will give them a 15% higher return if they have a diverse board session. So in a perfect world, of course, we should also always be delivering for talent. But I think also, again, previously we spoke about the talent pipeline. If I look up through the talent pipeline and all I see are people that look nothing like me or behave nothing like me or have beliefs about how you balance your work and your life, someone called it the other day a work-life blend. That seemed like real life was just going to get squidged out. I'm not necessarily even going to bother thinking about going into that space. So it's important that we have role models and we can build that talent pipeline. It's also then important, that we are making sure that we're hiring the talent that we need, but also being super conscious that we are spreading our net as wide as possible to look at how we sort of start engaging with the pool of talent that we find. Again, it was mentioned earlier, just try a little bit harder. If you find that all your candidates come from a particular red brick university, or even just a red brick university, somebody the other day asked me about was my first degree, which was like 30 years ago, was it from a red brick university? Was it from someone in the Russell Group? And I said, well, no, it was neither of those things, at which point you can see them going, cross. I'm like, but for the subject I studied, it's the #1 establishment in the world. So yes, you can complain that I'm not one of 27 universities in the UK and dismiss me, or you can sit there and say, actually, for what you studied, you're #1 in the world, and that's probably a more important or relevant statistic. So just think a little bit more broadly.
What did you study?
I did history and chemistry to do with drawing and printmaking at Camberwell School of Art. Because everybody gets into banking that way, don't they?
This traditional route.
Yes.
Really interesting comment here, actually, talking about Jobs and Zuckerberg that you showed earlier. Yeah. It says here that they felt they were the odd ones out, and that's why they started their own companies that became the largest. Would this have happened if they'd felt comfortable?
They were obviously comfortable going out on their own and feeling that they would be supported to deliver their original thoughts. They were surrounded by other white men who were doing well, and it's kind of like, well, they're doing well, why can't I? Again, if you are a black woman, if you are an Hispanic, I don't know, person, let's just call anybody other than white and male, fundamentally. And I know as a white female, I have a huge amount of privilege, and it's somewhat ironic that I'm standing here talking about this. However, if you look around, again, if you look around and the people who are being successful and the people who are doing things are the same as you, then why would you not think that you could do something? If you had an idea and you felt you could do something better, why would you not give that a go, as opposed to, I see nobody who looks like me, and therefore I'm not sure that I should even start?
Okay, great answer. Just one final question. Do you think equality is a top-down conversation or bottom-up?
It's both. Because, again, this was mentioned earlier, there's no point inviting someone into your company who you recognize as being diverse, and you've hired them because they're diverse, and their neurodiversity will add to your culture and it will add to your ability to innovate. If then actually what you need them to do is assimilate with what is the standard norm inside your company, because it's too uncomfortable to have somebody who's different. So I think that you need your CEOs to be on board with how you are engaging across that diversity, and then you also need the grassroots level to be pushing to say, we need more different thoughts, we need more different ways of looking at the problem. If you have 27 people that have all come from a similar background with a similar education and a similar way of thinking, you will probably only get 1 or 2 answers to a challenge. If you have 27 people who are all completely different, chances are you'll get at least 27 different answers on what the outcome or the most robust impact for something might be.
But do those 27 different answers provide the right solution?
Who's to say the one that 27 agreed with does? They're all still running to the edge of the cliff.
Actually, we're going to argue about this, aren't we? Okay, so in your own experience, I did say one last question, but I'm going to go for this one. In your own experience, are companies getting any better at this?
No, they're not, in a word.
Okay, what a great way to end the session. Okay, Kate, thank you very much for your insight today.
Thank you very much.